Well, now, without more ado, let's meet my two guests. They'll be with us for the whole programme. Douglas Murray, he's author of several books, including Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, and his latest book, Bloody Sunday. He's also Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank here in London. He's with me in the studio. Good morning, Douglas.
Good morning, good to be with you.
And Amira Woods, she's co-director of the Foreign Policy in Focus think tank at the left-leaning Institute for Policy Studies, and she's staying up very late for us, live on the line from Washington, D.C. So, good night, good evening. Hello, Amira.
It's all good. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, you heard that clip about middle age, Amira. The great thing, and I'm telling everyone this, is that it's radio. But you've got an amazing CV, Amira, for one so young.
Thank you. I like the young
You
part.
were born in Liberia. Do you like to be called African-American, an American-African, an African who's shipped up in America?
I'd like to think of myself as having one foot on each side. So I'm an African in America, and I own it all, both the African side as well as the opportunity to influence U.S. policy. So one foot on each side seems to be the best of both worlds sometimes.
Now, you're in Washington, D.C. at the moment, a favourite city of mine. You've been involved with the Occupy D.C. movement. Tell us more about what you've been doing.
It's been exciting to see, and a lot of it is invisible in the mainstream media. But there's been activism going on all across the world, but especially all across the country, from Wall Street to right here in D.C. And what's coming up is exciting. It's being called 99% spring, right? So thinking about this 99% movement and how it is going to be training now people across the U.S., 100,000 people to be trained in civil disobedience, in nonviolence, in substantive issues. So there is this effort underway by think tanks like ours, by trade unions, by young people who are leading these Occupy movements to seize this opportunity now to educate a cadre of young people in hard, concrete skills that they will need for movement building for the future.
Good. Well, I'm glad there's going to be lots of young people on the programme. And that takes me straight to you, Douglas. You look very young to me across the table here in the studio.
Feeling distinctly old at this.
But you've been a bit of a hermit lately. Why is that?
Oh, I'm trying to finish another book, and one of the things about book writing is that I've discovered some time ago you can't do it if you agree to go out even at all.
I'm glad you came here.
I can do an early morning like this is a pleasure, but socialising becomes increasingly strained.
And tell us a bit, Douglas, about this think tank, the Henry Jackson Society.
Well, it's named after an American senator, the late Henry Scoop Jackson. He's, of course, a Democrat who was good on Cold War issues, good on defence, and took a cross-partisan approach. And we like to think that that's a model which we and others should follow, and that there are some things, and I think it's an important time for America to consider this as well, there are some things that are beyond even party politics.
Well, thanks to both of you at the moment. Looking forward to hearing from you both later in the programme. But now I'm afraid a bit of a change of mood, and our first news story. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Dee Sebastian with The World Today, and I'm joined for the rest of the programme by my guests. Douglas Murray is author of Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, and Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society in London. And Amira Woods is on the line from Washington, D.C. She's a co-director of the Independent Foreign Policy in Focus think tank at the left-leaning Institute for Policy Studies. Looking forward to talking to you both, but first let's go to Japan, where 100,000 people have still not been able to return to the homes they fled following the nuclear disaster at Fukushima a year ago. Thousands more are frightened about going back to places where radiation levels have gone up. The government has begun an unprecedented operation to try to decontaminate as much as 4,000 square kilometres of land. It's thought the final cost could reach $130 billion. Well, our correspondent Damien Grammaticus has been back to see how the radioactive fallout has transformed two communities close to the plant.
Winding up a narrow road, we're heading into the mountains about 40 kilometres north of the Fukushima plant. The road is lined with pine forest, the hills covered with snow. Professor Yuichi Tao is taking me up here to a radiation hotspot in the village of Itate. So in these houses now, there's nobody living here.
Yes. Some people feel that it's very dangerous. And some people they want to come back.
When do you think people will be able to come back here?
It's several years.
Several years. 6,500 people used to live in Itate village in a valley high up in the hills. Now the houses are all empty, eerily quiet. At the time of the disaster, the government knew that the wind was blowing radiation up here, but it took weeks before it warned anyone, then told them to evacuate. Now this place is too radioactive to live in. This is a Geiger counter of some sort.
We want to find out the direction of radiation.
The source of the radiation.
Yes.
Over time, the radiation is going down. Our guess is that if we collect the fallen leaves and cut down the trees, that will help decontaminate the area.
We're now climbing with the professor up a snow-covered path to reach the top of one of the hills overlooking Itate village. At the top of the hill is an observatory with giant radio telescopes, and from here you can look across these hills covered in pine forests towards the Fukushima plant. Professor Tao and his colleagues want to set up more monitoring equipment up here. With a Geiger counter, they're testing radiation levels in some of the buildings and the bricks lying around here. On a pile of bricks in a corner of the monitoring station, we get a reading of 72 microsieverts an hour. That's the highest anywhere. It's about 2 chest x-rays every hour at that level, way above the evacuation limits.
The government is saying that they will decontaminate everywhere. But look around. This village covers a huge area, and the area affected around the nuclear plant is many times bigger than this. I don't think they can do it. It will cost a colossal amount.
20 kilometres from the Fukushima nuclear plant, some policemen have just stopped us on the road. This is the checkpoint at the edge of the exclusion zone. Well, just behind us are the buildings of Minamisoma town. 75,000 people used to live here, 50,000 fled after the nuclear explosions, and half of them have yet to return, so it has a pretty empty feel. In the playground of the Haramachi Seiai nursery school in Minamisoma, about 20 children are playing a game of cops and robbers. They're dashing to and fro, trying to catch each other. It's like a school playground anywhere, only the children here all have masks on to protect them from radiation. While the children are playing, a teacher is going around with a damp cloth, wiping down the swings and the slides to clean off any radioactive particles. And just a few minutes ago, another teacher was out here. She had a handheld radiation counter, checking if the levels are okay for the children to be outside.
The only places the government has decontaminated are inside the nursery and in the playground. We can't even take the children outside our front gate. Until a proper clean-up is done, our life is confined to these small spaces.
And that report was by Damien Grammaticus. My guests on the programme, just to remind you, are Douglas Murray, who's author and a conservative British political commentator, and Amira Woods of an independent think tank. She's on the line from Washington, D.C. Douglas, the Japanese have had quite a lot to deal with in the last year. What's your impressions of how they've done it?
Well, I mean, despite the very disturbing aspects of that report, by and large, observing what's happened, you can't help but feel, I think, admiration for the way in which the Japanese have coped with what has been, would have been from any country, a catastrophic fallout. Just one other thing, which is that, of course, a lot of people have commented since the nuclear issue came back there last year that this highlights the problems of nuclear energy, and of course it does, but of course every single form of energy at the moment has problems and has significant downsides. There isn't yet a real proper clean version of energy that provides for the needs of any country. So I do hope that this isn't, again, one of those things that is used by people who are effectively anti-nuclear activists, because at the moment it's the most efficient way to overcome the energy crisis that the world is in.
It all depends, though, doesn't it, Douglas, if it's sitting on a fault line or not?
Of course, and that in this case is the biggest problem. But as I said, we've had even in Britain people citing this case as showing that, you know, this is a reason to put up windmills, for instance, that cover the last bits of remaining nice landscape here.
Well, we'll talk more about that in a moment. But Amira, in that report, I think you've got 3 children, as have I. Quite disturbing about what you do with your children in that kind of situation.
Well, I can't imagine what people have gone through over this past year, but especially those with children. I think the examples of Fukushima are really of concern, not only to people with children, but to all around the world, because, you know, we all live on this one planet that is in peril. So I guess, Douglas, I would say, you know, we have to look to alternatives like
Absolutely.
the windmills,
No,
like
absolutely.
solar energy, that will help protect the planet and will help protect our children and their children down the road. Clearly, when you have you have nuclear power. Again, it's not only Fukushima on the fault line, but you have nuclear power plants in New York, you know, very close to very high population areas, putting tremendous amounts of numbers of people in harm's way. There is a very real concern that a disaster at any of these plants around the world, not only Fukushima, can lead to dramatic, long-term, devastating effects for those communities. But I think what's of interest really is the fact that, you know, the construction is actually down when it comes to nuclear power plants. I think it's only 2 or so, the number of nuclear power plants that were actually starting construction in the last year since Fukushima, compared to, I guess it's something like 38 in the previous year and a half before.
Amira,
so I think the concerns are valid, and they're leading to a pressure to rethink nuclear energy.
Yes, because I can't quite get a handle on your take on that, Amira. Are you saying that you don't want more nuclear plants built?
Absolutely.
I think what Douglas was saying was that this disaster in Japan will lead people to move away from nuclear energy. So your view is the opposite to Douglas's.
My view is that it is leading people away from nuclear energy, and it should continue to move people away from nuclear energy and towards clean energy, whether it's solar or wind or others that have less devastating effects and less long-term risks
and
of
Douglas
nuclear
longing
disaster.
to come in here.
Sure, but I mean, and the issue is we're all of that. Everyone wants to find a clean version of energy, and most of us have some confidence that in the coming years and decades, somebody somewhere will discover the way in which, without polluting the environment and without having to resort to nuclear, you can provide for the energy needs of the world. But at the moment, solar and wind farms and so on simply do not provide the amount of energy which a large and growing world population believes it needs.
Well, I'm going to jump in there and we'll leave that discussion for now. But thanks so far, Douglas and Amira, on nuclear energy. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is Dee Sebastian with The World Today. Well, now let's move on. A campaign by a group of American activists to capture alleged Ugandan war criminal Joseph Kony has gone viral on the web. Invisible Children's half-hour film on the use of child soldiers by Kony's Lord's Resistance Army has been viewed millions of times on YouTube. The group aims to bring Kony to justice at the International Criminal Court, where he's charged with crimes against humanity. Here's a taster of what it's about.
Every single person in the world started this way. My name is Jason Russell, and this is my son, Gavin. And as a dad, I want him to grow up in a better world than I did. And because of the course of events in my life, I see a way to get there. Years before Gavin was born, the course of my life was changed entirely by another boy. It's been almost 10 years since Jacob and I became friends. But when my friends and I first met him in Uganda, in Central Africa, it was in very different circumstances. He was running for his life. You go to school here?
Yes.
Yes, that's how you know English so well.
I know.
Yeah. The night I first met Jacob, he told me what he and other children in northern Uganda were living through.
We worried the rebel, when they raise us again, then they will kill us. My brother tried to escape. Then they killed using panga. They cut his neck. I saw.
We fear that if we sleep at our home, we can be abducted by the rebels because our home is far away from town.